Tonight we're going to continue Socrates' Predecessors, and so, leading from where I left off, attempts to explain change. Heraclides, earlier philosopher, so this is about Heraclides. Earlier philosophers attempted to describe the ultimate constitutes of the world around us. Hercules, Hercules, circa 540 to 480 BCE, an aristocrat from Ephesus, shifted attention to a new problem, namely the problem of change. His chief idea was that all things are in flux, and he expressed the concept of constant change by saying that you cannot step twice into the same river. I heard that quote. It blew my brain to smithereens when I heard it. You can't step in the same river twice. Like relationships, situations, like memories, anything. It's just a stream, and yeah, you can't step in it twice. I think that is so eloquently put. Excuse me. So yeah, you cannot step in the same river twice. The river changes because fresh waters are ever flowing in upon you. This concept of flux, Heraclitus, a thought, must apply not only to rivers but to all things, and including the human soul. Rivers and people exhibit the fascinating fact of becoming different and yet remaining the same. We return to the same river, although fresh waters have flowed into it, and the adult is still the same person as the child. Things change and thereby take on many different forms. Nevertheless, they contain something that continues to be the same throughout all the flux of change. There must be, Heraclitus argued, some basic unity between these many forms and the single continuing element, between the many and the one. He made his case with such imaginative skill that much of what he had to say found an important place in the later philosophies of Plato and the Stoics. In more recent centuries, he was deeply admired by Hegel and Nietzsche. It's interesting how they all referring to like one. Like, there's just some unity formed around this just one, I don't know, entity thing, and they're all trying to like explain it back in the early days. Like, yo, what the fuck is this? I love it. Ask questions, figure it out. Flux and fire. To describe change as unity in diversity, Heraclitus assumed that there must be something that changes, and he argued that the something is fire. But he did not simply substitute the element of fire for Thales' water or Anaximenes' air. What led Heraclitus to fasten upon fire as the basic element in things was that fire behaves in such a way as to suggest how the process of change operates. Fire is simultaneously a deficiency and a surplus. It must constantly be fed, and it constantly gives off something either in the form of heat, smoke, or ashes. Fire is a process of transformation, then whereby what is fed into it is transformed into something else. That's interesting how they said fire is simultaneously a deficiency and a surplus. That's like something if you start learning just more about physics, I guess, and philosophy. There are so many oxymoronic rules or laws that are at play at all times that like are the source of things working, which is just like you just wouldn't think so. You'd think it makes sense. You wouldn't think it'd be a paradox. But anyways, um, fire is a process of transformation, then whereby what is fed into it transformed into something else. For Heraclitus, it was not enough simply to point to some basic element, such as water, as the underlying nature of reality. This would not answer the question of how the basic stuff could change into different forms. When therefore Heraclitus fastened upon fire, when therefore Heraclitus fastened upon fire as the basic reality. Hang on, buddy, come on. buddy has my buddy has a cat and he's just freaking out sometimes. All right. Okay. For Heraclitus, it was not enough simply to point to some basic element such as water as the underlying nature of reality. This would not answer the question of how this basic stuff could change into different forms. When, therefore, Heraclitus fastened upon fire as the basic reality, he not only identified the something that changes, but thought he had discovered the principle of change itself. To say that everything is in flux meant for Heraclitus that the world is an ever-living fire whose constant movement is assured by measures of its kindling and measures going out. Excuse me. That is interesting. Never living fire. Ever living fire. I don't know if I really agree with that. I do agree with the flux of things. I don't necessarily feel like ashes to dust and whatever. I don't know about that. But let's read on. Maybe he'll convince me. These measures meant for Heraclitus a kind of balance between what kindles and what goes out of the fire. He describes this balance in terms of financial exchange, saying that all things are in exchange for fire, and fire for all things, similar to merchandise for gold and gold for merchandise. With this explanation of exchange, Heraclitus maintained that nothing is really ever lost in the nature of things. If gold is exchanged for merchandise, both gold and the merchandise continue to exist, although they are now in different hands. Similarly, all things continue to exist, although they exchange their form from time to time. All right. There is a stability in the universe because of the orderly and balanced process of change or flux. The same measure comes out as it goes in, just as if reality were a huge fire that inhaled and exhaled equal amounts, thereby preserving an even inventory in the world. This inventory represents the widest array of things, and all of them are simply different forms of fire. Flux and change consist of the movements of fire, movements that Heraclitus called the upward and downward paths. The downward path of fire explains the coming into being of the things that we experience. So when fire is condensed, it becomes moist, and this moisture, under conditions of increased pressure, becomes water. Water, in turn, when it congealed, becomes earth. On the upward path, this process is reversed, and the earth is transformed into liquid. From the water come the various forms of life. Nothing is ever lost in the process of transformation because, as Heraclitus says, fire lives the death of earth, and the air. Nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever lost in this process of transformation because, as Heraclitus says, fire lives the death of earth and air the death of fire. Water lives the death of air, earth that of water. With this description of the constant transformation of things in fire, Heraclitus thought he had explained the rudiments of the unity between the one basic stuff and the many diverse things in the world. But there was another significant idea that Heraclitus added to this concept of fire, namely the idea of reason as the universal law. I do enjoy that being a route we took. Reason. Fuck. Yeah. Reason as the universal law. The process of change is not a haphazard movement, but the product of God's universal reason, in parentheses, logos. This idea of reason came from Heraclitus' religious conviction that the most real thing of all is the soul. Fuck yeah, it is. And the soul's most distinctive and important attribute is wisdom or thought. Fucking A. Okay, dude. Yeah, I agree with this shit. Fucking hell, I'm gonna reread it. The process of change is not a haphazard movement, but the product of God's universal reason, in parentheses logos. This idea of reason came from Heraclides' religious conviction that the most real thing of all is the soul, and the soul's most distinctive and important attribute is wisdom or thought. But when he speaks about God and the soul, he does not have in mind separate personal entities. For him, there is only one basic reality, namely fire, and it is the material substance, fire that Heraclides calls the One, or God. Inevitably, Heraclides was a pantheist, a term meaning that God is identical with the totality of things in the universe. For Heraclides, all things are fire/God. Since fire/God is in everything, even the human soul is a part of the fire/God. As wisdom is fire/God's most important attribute, wisdom or thought is human beings' chief activity. But inanimate things also contain the principle of reason, since they are also permeated within the fiery element. Because fire/God is reverse, and because fire/God is the one permeating all things, Heraclides believed that fire/God is the universal reason, and as such, fire/God unifies all things and commands them to move and change in accordance with thought and rational principles. These rational principles constitute the essence of law, the universal law immanent in all things, and people share this universal law to the degree that they possess fire/God in their own natures and thereby possess the capacity for thought. Logically, this account for our rational nature would mean that all of our thoughts are God's thoughts. Since there is a unity between the one and the many, between God and human beings, we all must share in a common stock of knowledge, since we all have a similar relation to God. Even stones partake in that part of God's reason which makes them all equally behave according to the law of gravity. But people notoriously disagree and behave quite inconsistently, recognizing this fact about human disagreement. Heraclides says that those awake have one ordered universe in common, but in sleep everyone turns away to one of his own. Sleep, for Heraclides, must mean to be thoughtless or even ignorant. Unfortunately, he does not explain how it is possible for people to be thoughtless if their souls and minds are part of God. In spite of its limitations, Heraclides' theory had a profound impact on succeeding thinkers. This is particularly so concerning his conviction that there is a common universe available to all thoughtful people, and that all people participate in God's universal reason or universal law. In later centuries, it was the concept that provided the basis for the Stoics' idea of cosmopolitanism. It was this concept that provided the basis for the Stoics' idea of it was this it was this concept that provided the basis for the Stoics' idea of cosmopolitanism. Fuck me, I did it right the first time, then I just fucked it up. In later century, it was this concept that provided the basis for the Stoics' idea of cosmopolitanism, the idea that all people are equally citizens of the world precisely because they all share in the one, and God's reason. According to the Stoics, we all contain in ourselves some portion of the fire, that is, sparks of the divine. It was this concept, too, that formed the foundation of the classic theory of natural law. I'm going to say that again. It was this concept too that formed the foundation for the classic theory of natural law. With some variations, the natural law passed from Heraclides to the Stoics, to medieval theologians, and eventually became a dynamic force in the American Revolution. Even today, natural law is a vital component of legal theory. It's really interesting how it's just like, yeah, somebody just says something and they might not be 100% right, but they're just pointing, and I think that's something that we're not doing no more. We're not pointing in any directions and thinking like new thoughts about stuff, really. Sure, there's innovation in technology and things like that, but like, have we really, appliance wise, in your household, have we really gone that crazy since the 70s? No. But fuck, I don't have my phone on me, but like that's the fucking thing we advanced in, and that shit's just not uh, beneficial in the societal sense. So, the conflict of opposites. Although human beings can know the eternal wisdom from all, although human beings can know the eternal wisdom that directs all things, we do not pay attention to this wisdom. We therefore prove to be uncomprehending of the reasons for the way things happen to us. Sorry, it's a little far. We are distressed by meaningless disorders in the world and overwhelmed by the presence of good and evil, and we long for the peace that means the end of strife. Heraclides offers us Heraclides offers us little comfort here, since for him strife is the very essence of change itself. For him, strife is the very essence of change itself. The conflict of opposites that we see in the world is not a calamity, but simply the permanent condition of all things. According to Heraclides, if we could visualize the whole process of change, we would see that war is common and justice is strife, and that all things happen by strife and necessity. From this perspective, he says, what is in opposition is in concert, and from what differs comes the most beautiful harmony. Even death is no longer a calamity, for after death things await people which they do not expect or imagine. Oh. Thoughtful his treatment of this problem. Throughout his treatment of the problem of strife and disorder, Heraclides emphasizes again and again that many find their unity in the one. Thus, what appear to be disjointed events and contradictory forces are reality intimately harmonized. For this reason, he says, people do not know how what is at various for this reason, he says people do not know how. For this reason, he says people do not know how what is at variance agrees with itself. It is an attunement of opposite tensions, like that of the bow and the lyre. Fire itself exhibits the tension of opposites, and indeed depends on it. Fire is its many tensions of opposites. In the one, the many find their unity. Thus, in the one, the way up and the way down is the same. Good and ill are one, and it is the same thing in us that is quick and dead, awake and asleep, young and old. The solution of the conflict of opposites rests upon Heraclides' major assumption that nothing is ever lost, but merely changes its form. Following the direction of reason, the eternal fire moves with a measured pace, and all change requires opposite and diverse things still. To God, all things are fair and good and right, but people hold some things wrong and some right. Heraclides did not come to this conclusion because he believed that there was a personal God who judged that all things are good. Instead, he thought that it is wise to agree that all things are one, that the one takes shape and appears in many forms. Yeah, it does. The one takes shape in many forms. Yeah, you know. I think that's kind of the idea of transcending. Like, I don't know, you can experience a certain spiritual experience. You can encounter a certain spiritual experience if you're in maybe the right flow state or meditative state. And you really only know that room exists once you've been inside of it, you know? It's worth checking out. It's worth knocking. For sure. So that was it for Heraclides, right? That's what he added to the conversation. Now we're going to go into Parmenides. And I apologize if I'm saying any of these names wrong. They're pretty tough. It's like, sounded out. It's like, I don't know if those letters go together, bro. You know? I'd be interested to think what you guys think so far about all this shit. Like, I don't know. Like, does this interest you as much as it interests me? Like, just hearing people's thoughts and how they developed and how they all just added to each other. And it was an open conversation. You know, I'm sure there were some disagreements or arguments and things, but, that's a part of conversating. Um, just seems like we're not talking about anything anymore. We're talking a lot. We're talking a lot. but not about anything. And it's Parmenides, a younger contemporary of Heraclides. Parmenides was born about 510 BCE and lived most of his life in Elea, 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 like Elea, a colony founded by Greek refugees in the southwest of Italy. He flourished there in more than one capacity, giving the people of Italy laws and establishing a new school of philosophy whose followers became known as Eleatics. Eleatics. Dissatisfied with the philosophical views of his predecessors, Parmenides offered the quite startling theory that the entire universe consists of one thing, which never changes, has no parts, and can never be destroyed. He calls this single thing the One. Granted, it may appear as though things change in the world, such as when a large oak tree grows from a tiny acorn. It may also appear as though there are many different things in the world, such as rocks, trees, houses, and people. However, according to Parmenides, all such things, all such change and diversity is an illusion. In spite of appearances, there is only one single, unchanging, and eternal thing that exists. Why would Parmenides offer a theory that is so contrary to appearances? The answer is that he was more persuaded by logical reasoning than by what he saw with his own eyes. Believe half of what you hear and none of what you see. The logic, that wasn't written, that's just a thing out there. The logic of Parmenides' theory begins with the simple statement that something is or something is not. For example, cows exist, but unicorns do not exist. On further consideration, though, Parmenides realizes that we can assert only the first part of the above statement, that something is. The reason is that we can only conceptualize and speak about things that exist. We are unable to do this with things that don't exist. Can any of us form a mental picture of the non-existent? Thus, according to Parmenides, we must reject any contention that implies that something is not. Parmenides then unpacks several implications from this observation. First, he argues that nothing ever changes. Heraclides, we have seen, held that everything is in constant change. Parmenides holds the exact opposite view. We typically observe that things change by coming into existence and then going out of existence. A large oak tree, for example, comes into existence when it emerges from a tiny acorn. The tree then goes out of existence when it dies and decomposes. Although this is how things appear to our eyes, Parmenides argues that this alleged process of change is logically flawed. We first say that the tree is not, then it is. Then once again, it is not. Here we begin and end with the impossible contention that something is not. Logically, then, we are forced to reject this alleged process of change, chalking it up to one big illusion. Thus, nothing ever changes. Parmenides argues similarly that the world consists of one indivisible thing. Again, we typically observe that the world contains many different things. Suppose, for example, that I see a cat sitting on a carpet. My common perception of this is that the cat and the carpet are different things and not simply one undifferentiated mass of stuff. But this common view of physical differentiation is logically flawed. I am, in essence, saying that beneath the cat's feet, the cat is not, but from its feet through its head, the cat is, and above the cat's head, the cat is not. Thus, when I demarcate the physical borders of the cat, I begin and end with the impossible contention that something is not. I must then reject the alleged fact of physical differentiation and once again chalk it up to one big illusion. In short, only one indivisible thing exists. Using similar logic, Parmenides argues that the one must be motionless. If it moved, then it would not exist where it was before, which involves illogically asserting that something is not. Also, Parmenides argues that the one must be a perfect sphere. If it were irregular in any way, such as a bowling ball with 3 holes drilled in it, then it would it would involve a region within the ball where nothing existed. This too would wrongly assert that something is not. Even if we grant the logical force of Parmenides' arguments, it is not easy for us to cast off our common sense view that the world exhibits change and multiplicity. Everywhere we see things in flux, and to us this represents genuine change. But Parmenides rejected these common sense notions and insisted on a distinction between appearance and reality. Change and multiplicity, he says, involve a confusion between appearance and reality. What lies behind this distinction between appearance and reality is Parmenides' equally important distinction between opinion and truth. Appearance cannot produce more than opinion, whereas reality is the basis of truth. Common sense tells us that things appear to be in flux and therefore in a continuous process of change. However, Parmenides says that this opinion based on sensation must yield to the activity of reason. Reason, in turn, is able to discern the truth about things, and reason tells us that if there is a single substance of which everything consists, then there can be no movement or change. To some extent, Thales made a similar point when he said that everything derives from water. Thales thus implies that the appearance of things does not give us the true constitution or stuff of reality. But Parmenides explicitly emphasized these distinctions, which became crucial to Plato's philosophy. Plato took Parmenides' basic view of the unchangeability of being and developed from this his distinction between the intelligible world of truth and the visible world of opinion. At the age of 65, Parmenides went to Athens, accompanied by his chief pupil Zeno, and according to tradition on this visit, he conversed with the young Socrates. Parmenides' radical views about change and multiplicity inevitably incited critical challenges and ridicule. It was left to Zeno to defend his master's position against his attackers. And then we go into Zeno. Zeno, born in Elea around about 489 BCE, Zeno was over 40 years old when he visited Athens with Parmenides. Zeno was over 40 years old when he visited Athens with Parmenides. In defending Parmenides, Zeno's main strategy was to show that the so-called common sense view of the world led to confusions even more ridiculous than Parmenides. The Pythagoreans, for example, rejected the basic assumption Parmenides had accepted, namely that reality is one. Instead, they believed in a plurality of things, that there exists a quantity of separate and distinct things, and that, therefore, motion and change are real. Their argument seemed to accord more closely with common sense and the testimony of the senses. But Parmenides' approach, which Zeno followed, required a distinction between appearance and reality. To philosophize according to Parmenides and to Zeno, we must not only look at the world, but also think about it in order to understand it. Zeno felt strongly that our senses give us no clue about reality, but only about appearances. Accordingly, our senses do not give us reliable knowledge, but only opinion. He demonstrates this using the example of a millet seed. If we take a millet seed and drop it to the ground, it will not make a sound. But if we take a half bushel of millet seeds and let them fall to the ground, there will be a sound. From this difference, Zeno concluded that our senses have deceived us. Either there is a sound when the single seed falls, or there is not a sound when the single seed falls. No. Either there is a sound when the single seed falls, or there is not a sound when the many seeds fall. So to get to the truth of things, it is more reliable to go by the way of thought than by way of sensation. Yeah, I should probably listen to that a little bit more. That's some shit my grandma would say. So to get to the truth of things is more reliable to go by way of thought than by way of sensation. All right. Yeah, we get it. Like, I hear you. Zeno's four paradoxes. See? Told you bitches were just fucking oxymoronic, paradoxical things. Some bullshit. So these are Zeno's four paradoxes. Zeno's four paradoxes. In answering Parmenides' critics, Zeno fashioned his arguments in the form of paradoxes. The common sense view of the world rests on two principal assumptions. Number one, changes occur throughout time, and two, a diversity of objects are spread throughout space. Following Parmenides, Zeno, of course, rejects both of these assumptions. However, in arguing against the common sense view of things, Zeno provisionally grants the above two assumptions and then notes paradoxes that follow from them. The consequences are in fact so absurd that the common sense view of the world no longer seems so commonsensical. By contrast, then, Parmenides' view of the one seems to be the more reasonable account of the world. Zeno presents four principal paradoxes. The first one, the race course. According to this paradox of motion, a runner crosses a series of units of distance from the beginning to the end of the race course. But, Zeno asks, just what takes place in this example? Is there really any Pythagorean... Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm starting over. Number one, the race course. According to this paradox of motion, a runner crosses a series of units of distance from the beginning to the end of the race course. But Zeno asks just what takes place in this example. Is there really any motion? In order to traverse this race course, the runner, according to the Pythagorean hypothesis, would have to cross an infinite number of points, and to do so in a finite number of movements. But the critical question is, how can one cross an infinite number of points in a finite amount of time? The runner cannot reach the end of the course until the first reach the runner could not reach the end of the course until first reaching the halfway point. But the distance from the beginning to the halfway point can also be divided in half, and the runner must first reach that point, the 1/4 mark, before reaching the halfway point. Likewise, the distance between the beginning and the 1/4 point is divisible, and the process of division must go on to infinitude. And since there is always a remainder and every such unit is divisible. If then the runner cannot reach any point without first reaching its previous midpoint, and if there are an infinite number of points, it is impossible to cross the infinite number of points in a finite amount of time. For this reason, Zeno concludes that motion does not exist. Okay. Number two, Achilles and the tortoise. This paradox is similar to the race course illustration. Imagine a race between the swift Achilles and a tortoise. Because he is a good sport, Achilles gives the tortoise a head start, and thus in pursuit of the tortoise. Zeno argues that Achilles cannot overtake the tortoise because he must always reach the point that the tortoise has passed. The distance between Achilles and the tortoise will always be divisible, and as in the case of the race course, no point can be reached before the previous point has been reached. The effect is that there can be no motion at all, and Achilles on these assumptions can never overtake the tortoise. What Zeno thought he had demonstrated here was again that although the Pythagoreans claimed the reality of motion, their theory of the plurality of the world made it impossible to think of an idea of motion in a coherent way. Number three, the arrow. Does an arrow move when the archer shoots it at the target? Here again, the Pythagoreans, who had argued for the reality of space and therefore of its divisibility, would have to say that the moving arrow must at every moment occupy a particular position in space. But if an arrow occupies a position in space equal to its length, this is precisely what is meant when we say that the arrow is at rest. Since the arrow must always occupy such a position in space equal to its length, the arrow must always be at rest. Moreover, any quantity, as we saw in the example of the race course, is infinitely divisible. Hence, the space occupied by the arrow is infinite, and as such, it must coincide with everything else, in which case everything else must be one instead of many. Motion, therefore, is an illusion. Number four, the reality of motion. Imagine 3 passenger cars of equal length on tracks parallel to each other, with each car having 8 windows on the side. One car is stationary and the other two are moving in opposite directions at the same speed. In figure 1, car A is stationary and cars B and C are moving in opposite directions at the same speed until they reach the positions shown in figure 2. In order to reach the positions in figure 2, the front of car B would go past 4 of car A's windows, while the front of car C would go past all 8 of car B's windows. Each window represents a unit of distance, and each unit is passed in an equal unit of time. And then if you want to just take a screenshot of like what this looks like, if it shows up kind of. I don't know how to make this focus on that. Oh, there we go. So that's what the diagram looks like that they're talking about. So if you want to take a screenshot of that while I'm reading that, go back and look at it. But so now car B went past only 4 of A's windows, while car C went past 8 of B's windows. Since each window represents the same unit of time, it follows that 4 units of time are equal to 8 units of time, or that 4 units of distance equal 8 units of distance, which is absurd. Whatever may be the inner complications of this argument, Zeno's chief point was that motion has no clear definition and it is a relative concept. Theory of relativity, maybe. Sneak peek. Foreshadow. Who knows? Let's read on. Next guy. Empedocles. I think it's Empedocles. That sounds more accurate. So, Empedocles was an impressive figure in his native Agrigentum, Sicily, where he lived probably from 490 to 430 BCE. His interests and activities ranged from politics and medicine to religion and philosophy. Legend has it, wishing to be remembered as a godlike figure, he ended his life by leaping into a crater of Mount Etna, hoping thereby to leave no trace of his body so that people would think he had gone up to heaven. All right. He wrote his philosophy in the form of poetry, and of which only a small portion survives. From it, we see not an original or new philosophy, but rather a new way of putting together what his predecessors had already said. Empedocles believed that the arguments both for and against motion and change had some merit. Instead of taking either side, however, he ingenuously merged both points of view in what was the first attempt at combining the major philosophical contributions of his predecessors. He thereby discovered a consistent way of saying that there is change and, at the same time, affirming that reality is fundamentally changeless. Empedocles agreed with Parmenides that being an uncreated Empedocles agreed with Parmenides that being is uncreated and indestructible. That it simply is. He writes that from it no wise exists. He writes that from what in no wise exists, it is impossible for anything to come into being, and for being to perish completely is incapable of fulfillment and unthinkable, for it will always be there, whenever anyone may place it on any occasion. Wherever anyone may place, and reading that again, he writes that from what in no wise exists, it is impossible for anything to come into being, and for being to perish completely is incapable of fulfillment and unthinkable, for it will always be there, wherever anyone may place it on any occasion. Anyone may place it on any occasion. But unlike Parmenides, he did not agree that existence consists simply of the one. To accept the notion of the one requires us to deny the reality of motion. But to Empedocles, the phenomenon of motion was both too obvious and too compelling to deny. He therefore rejected the idea of the one. However, agreeing with Parmenides that being is uncreated and indestructible, Empedocles argued that being is not one but many. It is the many that it is the many which are changeless and eternal. According to Empedocles, the objects that we see and experience do in fact come into being and are also destroyed. But such change and motion are possible because objects are composed of many material particles. Thus, although objects can change, as Heraclitus said, the particles of which they are composed are changeless. As Parmenides said about the one, but of what did these particles consist? Empedocles held that these particles are four eternal material elements, namely earth, air, fire, and water. He developed this idea by reinterpreting the philosophies of Thales and Anaximenes, who emphasized the primary elements of water and air, respectively following Greek tradition, which emphasized the four primary elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Empedocles expanded on Thales and Anaximenes' theories. These four elements, he believed, are changeless and eternal and can never be transformed into something else. What explains the changes in objects that we see around us is the mixture of the four elements, but not their transformation. There is, he writes, only a mingling and interchange of what has been mingled. Earth, air, fire, and water, though they are unchangeable particles, mingle together to form objects and thereby make possible what in common experience we see as change. Empedocles' account of earth, air, and fire Empedocles' account of earth, air, fire, and water constitutes only the first part of his theory. The second part is an account of the specific forces that animate the process of change. The Ionians assumed that the stuff of nature simply transformed itself into various objects. Excuse me. Only Anaximenes made any detailed attempt to analyze the process of change with his theory of condensed and expanded air. By contrast, Empedocles assumed that there are in nature two forces, which he called love and hate, alternatively, harmony and discord. I love that they use harmony the way they do. I really do, and discord as well. These are the forces that cause the four elements to intermingle and later to separate. The force of love causes elements to attract each other and build up into some particles, form, or person. The force of hate causes the decomposition of things. The four elements then mix together or separate from each other depending on how much love or hate are present. In fact, Empedocles believed that there are cycles within nature that manifest love and strife in differing degrees at different times. Expressing this never-ending cycle in his poetic style, Empedocles writes that this process is clearly to be seen throughout the mass of mortal limbs. Sometimes through love all the limbs which the body has as its lots come together into one in the prime of flourishing life, at another time again sundered by evil feuds, they wander several. Things are rather tough, man. All right. This process is clearly to be seen throughout the mass of mortal limbs, sometimes through love, all the limbs which the body has as its lot come together into one, in the prime of flourishing life. At another time again, sundered by evil feuds, they wander severally. They wander severally by the breakers of the shore of life. They wander severally. All right, we're going to get through this one. This process is clearly to be seen throughout the mass of mortal limbs, sometimes through love, all the limbs which the body has as its lot come together into one in the prime of flourishing life. At another time again, sundered by evil feuds, they wander severally by the breakers of the shore of life. Likewise, too, with shrub plants and fish in their watery dwelling, and beasts with mountain lairs, and diver birds that travel on wings. That was the end of his passage. there are four stages to the cycle. In the first stage, love is present and hate is completely absent. Here, the four elements are fully commingled and are held in harmony by the governing principle of love. In the second stage, the force of hate lurking nearby starts to invade things, but there is still more love present than hate. In the third stage, hate begins to predominate and the particles fall into discord and begin to separate. In the final stage, only hate is present, and all particles of earth, air, and fire, water separate into their own four groups. There are elements there the elements are ready to begin a new cycle as the force of love returns to attract the elements into harmonious combinations. This process continues without end. I love the idea that they're using like love and hate together like that. Yeah, what if it's just these forces, man? I don't fucking know. What if it is just you putting out love and it's just like that's what ripples and shit. I love this. I think that's enough for tonight. We can get back into it soon. There's probably gonna be one more episode of like Socrates' predecessors, and then we'll go into Socrates, and then finish up with Plato. Maybe redo some of the episodes of Plato. I think I need to. Yeah, man. I'm just doing this. I think this information is nectar. I like that word a lot. You know, food for the brain, brain food, food for thought. It's important. And I just don't feel like enough of their. I mean, there's information out there, but it's just not. I don't know, high quality. I hope you learned something from these videos, or I hope it just sparks a thought in your head. You know, as simple as that. That's it. I don't care if I spend hours of my time reading these books, as long as it may spark some thought in someone's head for the better of all of us. I think that should be almost everybody's, not purpose, but it should be an objective of some sort for everybody, I think. I think it's hard too, with all the negativity there is in the world, and how, I don't want to say algorithms, but just people being programmed to feed off of negativity. I think that's one of the epidemics that we're facing, but not really talking about. I think we need to get back to the thirst of knowledge and creativity. I think we need to get back to the thirst of knowledge and creativity. And I hope to be a voice for that. Spokesperson, perhaps. I don't know. That sounds kind of lame, but a voice for it would be nice to get the conversation started. That's all it is. Let's actually talk, not just say things. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation about ideas. Let's expand our thoughts on the ideas. It's so important to see where you could maybe be wrong in your thinking. And if you never open yourself up to having conversations like that, then how are you ever going to recalibrate? And people don't recalibrate, They just get more entrenched in their ideas, especially in debates nowadays. It seems like that's all that is. They just bolster down on their side even harder, when it's like, let the other person's side come into you a little bit, so it's like you can see what they're saying a little bit more, not just like immediately trying to prove how they're incorrect or wrong. That's not a way to have a conversation. That's a way to have an argument. Thinking is cool. Thinking is really cool. It's probably the coolest thing you can do. And you know why? Because nothing else can do it. Nothing else can do it. And then, with primal instincts and pattern recognition things or whatever you may say, or like, information stored in their genetics. Like I remember I heard about this. I had this AP Psych teacher, Mr. Woodbury. He was the fucking man, bro. He taught me how cool it was to be smart. Cause like the way he sounded was smart. He didn't sound like a douchebag. He was just cool, and like he would just tell you information. It's like that's yes, like just spread information and knowledge. And if it's something I'm interested in or I can apply somewhere, then thank you. But it's like we're, rarely is information being spread, and it's just yeah. All right. Anyways, what was I gonna say about it? Mr. Woodbury. I hope I didn't fucking lose that. I got excited about him. Hmm. Damn. Well, I just remember one thing though that really was an important thing that stuck out in this class, and he would always say correlation is not causation. And yeah, like I think, and he would say it all the time because he knew people wouldn't fucking get it. Like he knew, and that's like how redundant things have to be to get through to fucking people because their skull's so thick. It's been so, you know, I don't want to say turn the mush, but it's just like in one ear out the other type. If it doesn't apply to my life, hey, it doesn't matter to me, right? And it's just not the way to live. Like we should stop just washing our hands of everything and have the conversations, find the solutions. We're creative and intelligent and intellectual enough to figure anything out, I feel, if we were to unite and just combine our efforts. It's so strange to me that we have separated the way we have, claiming that we're unified and like, I don't know, we're all one race. It's so weird. It's so weird that like somehow there's a distinction or differentiation between me and another, depending on where they're from or wherever. It just makes no fucking sense. It makes no fucking sense. I'm not saying anything more than that, but it's just like it makes no fucking sense. And to think that it's just still like we're still stuck there. Like that's why I kind of meant earlier about like how much have we really progressed in technology? Like we have a 6-inch screen in our pocket that we have a computer in our pockets now. Congratulations, that's dope. Yeah, it's really cool and fancy. You can do a lot of cool things on it, but it's like socially, economically. I mean, I don't know if you. I don't know statistics like I should probably, but it's not like we've really gone places for quite a few decades now. And it's like I feel like it could just be they just knew that with a certain level or volume of distraction that we wouldn't even really fucking notice. We'd just be like, yeah, like this is cool. And then like the little gadgets that come out, we get so excited about. Like it's a very strange Orwellian time to be alive in. And so just trying to respark thinking on your own, forming an own thought and your own stance on something, and researching it, learning more about it, seeing if you're wrong. I've been wrong about so many things, and it's important to figure that out. You can't live your whole life just thinking you're right about everything and you just are on the right side of all the things. It's like you don't know, like the information you're given could be such a propagandist agenda type thing. And I don't mean a conspiracy theory, but it's just like trials, clinical trials are funded by certain groups. And everything kind of could be along those lines, and if you understand what I'm saying. So, you really do gotta be careful where you're getting your information from. And that's why I kind of like this general book of just philosophy, history, and its problems. It's like, yeah, just tell me what's going on. I don't want to hear your little weird fucked up agenda. Just like tell me what happened and what they thought, and then I can think on my own after that. Thank you. You know, but we have so many tools now that stop us from having to think for ourselves, right? And they're tools. Yeah, they're good for us, and we should be using them. It's an advancement for us. Meanwhile, it's taking less activity out of our consciousness and brain and putting it into a machine, and it's only going further down that road. And I don't see how that's necessarily a benefit for the human race. I think it's a benefit for some, but I don't believe it's for the race of people, of mankind, of humankind. I do believe we'll wake up, though. I think people are dying for thirst of knowledge and information, and you know, um, the community that our species once had, I believe, at a certain time. And I'm not saying that there was never war and things like that. I understand that, but just we could be people again to each other instead of whatever the fuck these things have made us into. You know, remember just that love and hate thing. In the first stage, it's just love. What happens? How do we get farther away from that stage? Maybe that's just the friction of life that, compresses and expands that. But in the first stage, there was only love. I find myself there frequently. And people think it's strange when I'm in that space because they think that's a dumb sentence. No. It seems like they think I'm in some sort of manic episode, right? But it's just like, no, like I feel so fulfilled with the experience that I get to have that it looks odd to people. Like, it baffles me. They're like, "Are you all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm great." Like, terrific. You know, yeah, I get sad sometimes. It doesn't mean I am sad. I feel sad. Like it's that type of therapy shit. But yeah, like we are beyond. You should be beyond grateful for opening your eyes, fucking breathing. Yeah, I'm congested, but breathing. Like wiggling your toes. You could just, moving your lips, speaking, having teeth, like any fucking anything. And we just wake up, go through our lives, and not really ever think about it. And I know it's kind of like minute, and you can't really just spend your whole day thinking about it, but it's important to take notice of things, at least for a minimal part of your day, just to acknowledge that you have things that most people either never even got to have or lost or just, yeah, didn't even get a chance to see that part of life. Like, in my eyes, like, not saying I'm on extra time, but I mean, people I know that I went to school with have passed away, like younger than I was. And I mean, I don't know if currently, I think currently as well. I believe I heard some news recently, but living like all the time you guys actually makes you like squeeze the lemon type shit, you know, like you really get the most out of it. And I think that's also been kind of a big friction between a lot of the relationships I've had. It's just that like, yeah, like everything is so like how it should be, beautifully put. And I think a lot of other people live in very different ways. Um, Seems like they're waiting on something. I don't think that thing's ever coming, but it seems like these people are in constant waiting of something. When, yeah, there's this great quote from the Peaky Blinders where Thomas Shelby says, "The past is no longer my concern, the future is neither." And it's like, yeah, I think that's the wavelength that I've gone into as of recent. The past is no longer of my concern, the future is neither.